Walking away from a fractured dynamic will not magically force them to instantly surrender at your feet. You have been sold a dangerous lie that your sudden disappearance will yield immediate desperation and apologies. In reality, the exact moment you sever access, they will parade a fabricated happiness, broadcasting to the world that they remain entirely unaffected by your departure. You watch this performance and quietly panic, incorrectly assuming your withdrawal has completely failed. But true detachment is never a loud explosion. It is a meticulously planted psychological time bomb ticking deep within their subconscious. Today, we break down the brutal emotional mechanics of your total absence. You possess a deeply flawed expectation regarding the speed of human regret. When you finally muster the strength to walk away, you anticipate a rapid emotional collapse on their end. Instead, you're met with a chilling display of apparent indifference. They continue to post on social media as if your existence has been seamlessly erased from their timeline, laughing brightly with new companions and flaunting an entirely unbothered persona. This stark contrast between your internal agony and their external joy is specifically designed to completely shatter your resolve. This agonizing phase forces you into a spiral of devastating self-doubt. You sit alone in the heavy silence, tormented by the burning fear that they are genuinely unaffected and that you have permanently lost them. You fail to understand that their immediate reaction is heavily insulated by an inflated sense of victory. At this precise moment, they feel a rush of artificial freedom and absolute power, believing they successfully controlled the terms of the separation. Their ego shields them from the reality of the loss, allowing them to comfortably exist in a state of deliberate denial. You must radically adjust your timeline and completely disregard their initial performance. Silence is absolutely not a gunshot. It does not produce a loud, instant, or explosive reaction the very moment you pull away. It operates on a delayed, devastating fuse. Every single second you remain completely absent is another agonizing second closer to the inevitable detonation. You must possess the iron discipline to endure their temporary illusion of victory, knowing that the foundation of their confidence is already quietly beginning to fracture under the crushing weight of your absence. The initial high of their perceived freedom has a strict biological expiration date. While they currently revel in the lack of conflict and the removal of your expectations, that vast empty space slowly begins to change temperature. What initially felt like an expansive, liberating freedom gradually mutates into a quiet, gnawing curiosity. They begin to subconsciously wonder why you have not aggressively pursued them, why your expected panic never materialized, and what you're doing in the shadows of their awareness. This creeping curiosity is the first definitive crack in their emotional armor. As the silence stretches endlessly, that simple curiosity rapidly curdles into profound doubt. They start to critically evaluate their own value, questioning if you ever truly cared, or worse, if you have already effortlessly replaced them. This deeply unsettling doubt is the absolute precursor to regret. Just because you cannot physically witness this internal unraveling through their carefully curated digital facade does not mean the psychological erosion is not actively happening. You must treat your silence exactly like a meticulously planted explosive device buried deep inside their psychological architecture. You cannot hear the subtle ticking, and you absolutely cannot see the numerical countdown, but the mechanism is flawlessly active. Your absolute lack of reaction is starving their ego of the validation it desperately requires to maintain its structural integrity. You must remain terrifyingly still, allowing the silent pressure in their mind to build until it aggressively compromises their entire sense of reality. Human psychology operates much like the slow, unforgiving processes of the natural world. You cannot forcefully plant a seed in the cold ground and violently demand a fully formed flower to bloom that exact same evening. Your silence is the dark, heavy soil where the seeds of their regret are desperately trying to take root. Right now, you're staring at a completely barren surface, seeing absolutely zero visible signs of growth or remorse, which triggers your internal panic. Deep beneath their heavily guarded mental surface, massive structural shifts are quietly occurring. Every single day, you maintain your terrifying quiet, and every day you completely refuse to participate in the pathetic chase. That buried seed of regret actively sprouts. They are fighting a desperate internal battle, utilizing every available distraction to prevent themselves from showing you any visible weakness. They are actively trying to convince themselves that they do not feel the agonizing sting of your continuous absence. Your only required action during this brutal incubation period is absolute endurance. You must water this process with time and let the natural psychological laws execute their heavy work. If you dig up the soil prematurely just to check if the seed is growing, you instantly kill the entire organism. Your total absence is aggressively forcing their mind to process the reality of the separation without the comforting crutch of your predictable, desperate attention. You must let the heavy silence do the agonizing work you could never accomplish with mere words. The absolute most devastating mistake you can possibly make is fracturing the silence out of pure, unadulterated panic. Consumed by the terrifying illusion that they have permanently forgotten you, your anxiety forces you to take disastrous action. You frantically scroll through their social media, searching for hidden meanings in their updates, or you finally break and send a weak casual message just to check in. You're desperately begging for pathetic crumbs of attention to soothe your own fragile ego. This premature action instantly diffuses the psychological time bomb. Silence possesses absolutely zero power if it is merely a fake external performance. If you're acting quiet on the outside, but your internal state is screaming for their validation, they will instinctively feel the desperate vibration of your energy. If you're physically absent but continuously orbiting their digital life by viewing their stories or liking their content, they acutely sense your lingering attachment. The brutal laws of human interaction only reward silence when it is chillingly and utterly complete. Any form of reaching out, no matter how subtly disguised as a friendly check-in, immediately hands them back all the psychological leverage. It loudly communicates that your absence was a manipulative bluff and that you are still permanently chained to their reality. You must violently sever every single invisible thread connecting you to their existence, refusing to offer them the slightest confirmation that you are still waiting in the shadows. The ultimate paradigm shift occurs when you completely stop utilizing silence as a cheap manipulative tactic and begin living it as your absolute reality. Silence engineered as a tool for punishment is weak and inherently transparent. True power is unlocked only when your absence stems from a place of profound, impenetrable indifference. It is the exact moment you authentically realize you no longer desperately need their attention, and you no longer intensely crave their emotional reaction. When you reach the terrifyingly calm state where you can sit perfectly still in your own silence and genuinely smile, the balance of power violently transfers. They can fundamentally feel the exact moment you stop pretending to be strong and actually become entirely untouchable, because your energy has completely detached. They are left standing in a cold vacuum. This is when they truly start to wander through their memories, feeling the sharp, agonizing bite of your total absence. You do not beg for their return, you strictly refuse to argue, and you never rush the psychological process. You calmly trust the delayed devastation of the time bomb currently ticking inside their chest. They will inevitably feel the crush of the void. They will deeply regret the fracture. But your ultimate victory is not dependent on their inevitable return. You win by utilizing the silent void to become remarkably sharper, infinitely stronger, and so incredibly elevated that they have absolutely no choice but to desperately look up at you. The immediate aftermath of your departure triggers a profound psychological defense mechanism in them. They do not instantly collapse into visible sorrow. Instead, they construct an aggressive, hyper-visible performance of fake joy. You see them flashing brilliant smiles in carefully curated photographs, laughing loudly with new companions, and projecting an aura of absolute freedom. This loud display is designed to convince the world, and more importantly themselves, that your absence left no mark. You witness this incredibly loud performance and allow it to completely destroy your internal peace. Your chest tightens with anxiety, and you mistakenly interpret their frantic social activity as definitive proof that you meant absolutely nothing, and your departure is entirely unnoticed. You fail to realize the brutal reality. True happiness and genuine healing are inherently quiet, deeply private experiences. When a person is truly at peace with a profound loss, they absolutely do not feel a desperate, burning compulsion to aggressively broadcast their relief to every single observer within their extended network. The performance is a lie. You must learn to ruthlessly strip away the blinding lights of their performance and coldly observe the hollow architecture beneath it. Recognize their loud laughter and curated joy for exactly what it is, a desperate, emotionally exhausting attempt to drown out the deafening roar of your continuous absence. Stop blindly absorbing their digital theater as the ultimate undeniable truth of their existence. When you finally understand that their hypervisibility is merely a tragic symptom of their own internal chaos, you instantly reclaim the immense power to sit completely undisturbed in your own quiet reality. The human ego is a remarkably fragile, terrified construct that violently despises the sensation of being wrong or suffering a profound emotional loss. When you suddenly remove your valuable attention, their ego instantly goes into absolute survival mode, fiercely rejecting the harsh reality of the separation. It rapidly constructs a massive defensive wall of toxic pride, continuously whispering that they are the undisputed victor of this dynamic. However, this incredibly fragile pride absolutely requires a continuous external fuel source to survive the freezing cold vacuum you left behind. behind. In the chaotic beginning, this ego-driven high makes them appear completely untouchable and entirely unfazed. They walk with a heavily manufactured confidence, feeding greedily off the residual, arrogant belief that you're still desperately mourning their departure in the dark shadows. But you must realize this artificial strength is built on incredibly unstable, shifting ground. The human ego is entirely unsustainable without the steady, reliable supply of your emotional reactions, your frantic text messages, and your pathetic, weak attempts to seek closure or understanding. You must ruthlessly and intentionally starve this fragile, demanding entity. Your absolute unyielding silence acts as an incredibly heavy, suffocating pressure on the microscopic hidden cracks of their pride. Do not offer a single pathetic drop of validation, not even a trace of visible anger or bitter resentment. As you continue to coldly withhold your masculine energy, their ego begins to violently consume itself from the inside out. Let the crushing, undeniable weight of your total non-reactivity slowly and permanently dismantle the false paper crown they arrogantly placed upon their own head. We currently exist in an unforgiving era where every individual carries a highly curated, entirely artificial version of themselves right in their pocket. Following your sudden withdrawal, they will violently weaponize their digital persona against you, intentionally flooding their platforms with constant updates of their supposedly perfect, untroubled life. You must understand this is not a genuine reflection of their actual daily existence. It is a meticulously crafted psychological weapon aimed directly at your deep insecurities, desperately attempting to provoke you into breaking your powerful silence. Maintaining this pristine, flawless digital mask requires an immense, agonizing amount of daily psychological energy. Behind the glowing screen, the brutal reality of their existence looks radically, terrifyingly different. The physical house is empty, the lonely nights stretch endlessly, and the heavy silence of the room sharply contrasts with the loud, vibrant images they desperately post online for validation. The aggressive, tearing dissonance between their performed public joy and their internal private emptiness begins to aggressively rot their mental state from the inside out. You must completely and ruthlessly detach your internal emotional state from their pathetic digital theater. Recognize instantly that every single calculated post and filtered image is merely a desperate distress signal wrapped in the cheap illusion of triumph. Never allow a carefully angled photograph to dictate your internal hierarchy or shatter your unyielding discipline. When you permanently stop acting as the captive, tortured audience for their exhausting digital performance, the entire production violently collapses under the immense weight of its own pathetic uselessness. You routinely convince yourself that you're practicing strict, powerful silence simply because you are no longer sending direct messages or initiating phone calls. Yet you remain entirely pathetically enslaved to their daily existence. You violently compromise your own internal boundaries by obsessively watching their digital stories, analyzing their changing profile pictures, and stalking their online activity late into the dark night. You are completely silent with your physical mouth, but incredibly deafeningly loud with your frantic, terrified mind. This hidden, shameful obsession is a catastrophic, continuous leakage of your masculine energy. Even across the vast digital void, human intuition remains remarkably sharp. They can subconsciously, instinctively feel the heavy, lingering weight of your continuous observation. By quietly consuming their digital content, you forcefully confirm to them that they remain the absolute, undisputed center of your universe. You hand them all the immense psychological benefits of your attention while asking for absolutely nothing in return, completely destroying your remaining leverage. True. Devastating silence requires absolute, physical, and complete digital amputation. You must violently sever every single passive, cowardly avenue of observation you currently utilize. Block the social profiles, delete the search history, and forcefully lock the digital door you foolishly left cracked open. When you completely remove your invisible, lingering gaze from their life, the terrifying mystery of your existence multiplies exponentially. This total sensory deprivation is the exact psychological trigger that forces their casual curiosity to mutate into a burning, unquenchable obsession. You forcefully walk away from the toxic interaction, but you carefully and intentionally leave the psychological door cracked wide open behind you. You secretly harbor a desperate, pathetic hope that keeping a microscopic line of communication permanently available will somehow facilitate their grand, emotional, apologetic return. You deeply hesitate to fully close or You deep, you do, you do, you deep, you do, you deep, you t- you t- you c- you you you- if you You must aggressively slam the door shut and permanently shatter the lock. Completely remove the comfortable, pathetic safety net of your perpetual availability and unearned loyalty. They must be violently forced to navigate the cold, harsh reality of a world where you are completely and permanently inaccessible to them. When they finally understand that reaching you is no longer a casual, easy option, the true, crushing weight of their massive mistake will crash down upon them, leaving them to navigate the bitter consequences entirely alone. The human ego operates exactly like a raging, destructive fire in the immediate aftermath of your departure. This fire burns incredibly bright, fueled entirely by the arrogant assumption that they permanently possess the upper hand. They wear a fabricated crown, whispering to themselves that they hold absolute control because you were the one discarded. However, this blazing inferno of toxic pride is entirely unsustainable. It absolutely requires the constant, pathetic oxygen of your desperate attention, your pleading text messages, and your emotional availability to survive the ensuing void. The most dangerous illusion you face is expecting this collapse to happen overnight. You panic when weeks pass and they still appear strong, failing to understand the slow, suffocating nature of a starved ego. Silence operates like an immense, invisible pressure pressing against a tiny fracture in a pane of glass. On the surface, the structure looks entirely intact, but deep within, the structural integrity is violently tearing apart. They are actively deceiving themselves with false pride, but a quiet, terrifying voice in their subconscious is already warning them that something is profoundly wrong. You must ruthlessly maintain the terrifying vacuum of your absence. Do not offer a single drop of validation to reignite their fading fire. As you continuously withhold your energy, the oxygen depletes and their inflated pride begins to violently suffocate. A massive tree does not fall the exact moment you stop watering it. It stands tall for a season while its roots rot away underground. When you finally force their ego to starve completely, the resulting collapse will be absolute, leaving them entirely defenseless against the crushing reality of what they threw away. When their primary source of validation is abruptly severed, they will frantically scramble to secure a replacement supply. You will watch them dive headfirst into loud distractions, crowded rooms, and superficial interactions, desperately attempting to fill the massive void you left behind. They mistakenly believe that sheer volume can somehow replace the deep, concentrated value of your masculine presence. They are treating a profound psychological hemorrhage with a cheap, temporary bandage, entirely convinced that the bleeding has stopped simply because they refuse to look at the wound. The brutal reality of psychological withdrawal is utterly inescapable. Eventually, the deafening noise of the party fades, the superficial conversations dry up, and they are forced to sit alone in the terrifying quiet of their own mind. This is the exact moment the mirage violently shatters. They look around at the cheap, meaningless attention they have gathered and instantly realize it cannot replicate the profound depth and unwavering security you once provided. The hunger returns with a terrifying ferocity, not for general validation but specifically for the heavy, grounded energy they arrogantly took for granted. You must allow them to completely gorge themselves on this pathetic, infinite supply of meaningless digital validation. Let them realize on their own that 1,000 empty likes cannot substitute for the intense, singular focus of a high-value man. By remaining completely inaccessible, you elevate your status from a common commodity to a rare, irreplaceable artifact. When the absolute futility of their superficial distractions finally crashes down upon them, your chilling silence will echo louder than any words, proving that your value is entirely immune to their desperate attempts at substitution. There is a massive defining chasm between the mere physical act of walking away and the profound psychological state of true indifference. You can effortlessly move thousands of miles across the globe, block every digital avenue of communication, and aggressively delete every shared photograph, yet still remain completely enslaved to their memory. If your mind is constantly consumed by thoughts of their current location or their emotional state, you have only achieved physical exile. You're still dragging the heavy, suffocating chains of the relationship behind you, and they can absolutely sense that lingering tension. Your continued emotional resistance is a glaring beacon of your ongoing attachment. As long as you're using your silence merely as a manipulative tactic to forcefully extract a reaction from them, your energy remains completely tied to their existence. They inherently feel safe in this dynamic because they know you're still playing the game, simply waiting for them to make a move. True psychological leverage is only transferred the exact moment you permanently stop resisting the loss and organically shift your silence from a calculated weapon into your absolute, undeniable state of being. You must ruthlessly drop the invisible rope you're still desperately clinging to. Indifference is absolutely not a fiery anger or a cold, calculated rage. It is the terrifyingly calm realization that their presence is no longer a requirement for your existence. You achieve this not by forcing yourself to forget them, but by aggressively building a reality so incredibly dense and purposeful that their shadow simply cannot reach you anymore. When you finally detach entirely, becoming totally unbothered by their absence, you cross a psychological threshold that instantly turns your silence into an unstoppable magnetic force. Human psychology is brutally hardwired to intensely pursue that which actively and authentically withdraws its emotional energy. When you linger just on the periphery of their existence, maintaining a slight passive availability, you completely destroy any sense of urgency. The prize is still visible, comfortably within their reach whenever they decide they want it, but when you violently step completely out of frame and vanish over the horizon, you trigger a primal, deeply ingrained survival instinct. The sudden absolute removal of your presence creates an unbearable psychological vacuum that their mind desperately needs to resolve. The exact moment you achieve true, chilling indifference and drop your end of the emotional rope, they experience a violent psychological stumble. The sudden lack of resistance shocks their system. They are violently forced to confront the terrifying reality that the person who once worshipped them no longer requires their validation to survive. This profound realization flips the entire dynamic upside down. They transition instantly from a position of arrogant, untouchable power to a state of frantic, obsessive questioning, desperately wondering how they lost their grip on your reality. You must fiercely protect the absolute integrity of this void. Do not lift a single finger to alleviate the crushing pressure of the unknown that is now suffocating them. By refusing to offer any clues about your current trajectory, you force their imagination to violently spin out of control. They will endlessly wonder who currently commands your attention and how you managed to break free so cleanly. This terrifying mystery is the magnetic force that violently drags them out of their complacency and forces them to confront the devastating magnitude of their catastrophic miscalculation. Their most predictable and desperate defensive maneuver is the immediate acquisition of a replacement. They will forcefully rush into a new dynamic, aggressively parading a new partner in a pathetic attempt to permanently overwrite your memory. They mistakenly believe that securing a warm body will magically cure the cold reality of your absence. However, this frantic replacement does not kill your impact. It dramatically amplifies it. They are foolishly attempting to move into a fresh, brightly painted house while the profound memory of the home they abandoned is still violently burning in the background of their mind. The absolute tragedy of the rebound lies in the inescapable curse of comparison. Every single moment they share with this new entity is subconsciously measured against the established baseline of your past connection. Every shallow laugh, every forced argument, and every superficial embrace feels slightly defective because it completely lacks the deep, undeniable chemistry you once forged. The new relationship is not built on genuine, organic desire. It is constructed entirely on the fragile foundation of frantic escape. And deep down, they recognize that they are desperately forcing a bond that simply does not naturally exist. You must observe this frantic, pathetic scramble without absorbing a single ounce of fear or jealousy. Understand that their new partner is not a victor, but merely a temporary, inadequate bandage applied to a fatal psychological wound. Your unbreakable silence is the brutal mirror they cannot escape. The harder they struggle to convince the world that they have successfully upgraded, the louder the heavy silence reminds them that true, grounded connection is fundamentally irreplaceable. Let their desperate attempt at replacement completely collapse under the crushing weight of your undeniable superiority. The inevitable consequence of a fractured ego is the frantic, desperate attempt to rapidly replace what was lost. They will forcefully rush into new dynamics, heavily broadcasting a new partner to the world to prove their fabricated healing. However, this is nothing more than attempting to aggressively paint the walls of a brand new house while the deep foundational memory of the home they abandoned is still violently burning in the background of their mind. It is a superficial distraction masquerading as profound progress, built entirely on the fragile mechanics of escape rather than genuine, organic desire. This rebound strategy spectacularly backfires because it creates an inescapable echo chamber of brutal comparison. Every single interaction with this new entity is subconsciously and ruthlessly measured against the established baseline of your past connection. Every shallow laugh, every forced argument, and every superficial physical embrace feels distinctly defective. The new connection completely lacks the deep, undeniable chemistry you once forged, forcing them to confront the terrifying reality that genuine connection cannot be cheaply mass-produced or artificially manufactured on demand. You must observe this pathetic scramble with absolute chilling indifference. Do not allow the sight of their new companion to inject a single ounce of fear or insecurity into your mental framework. Understand that their new partner is not a victor, but merely a temporary, inadequate bandage applied to a fatal psychological wound. Your unbreakable silence is the brutal mirror they cannot escape. In the end, it will not be the new person they regret. It will be the agonizing realization that they permanently lost the one incredibly high-value individual they could never replace. Regret does not arrive as a single catastrophic event. It is a meticulously phased psychological process that crashes down in distinct waves. The very first wave is a cruel, deceptive sensation of absolute relief. In the immediate aftermath of the separation, they walk lighter and breathe easier, convinced that severing the connection was the ultimate victory. They confuse the sudden lack of interpersonal friction with genuine long-term freedom, allowing their fragile ego to temporarily shield them from the massive gravity of their permanent loss. You bear witness to this initial wave of relief, and it violently tears at your internal stability. You mistakenly interpret their lack of immediate grief as definitive proof that your shared history meant absolutely nothing. You must aggressively rewire this perception. This relief is nothing more than extremely shallow water splashing at the surface of their consciousness. It is a temporary biological high born exclusively from the removal of immediate tension, and it possesses absolutely zero structural integrity or long-term psychological endurance. You must weather this deceptive first wave without a single flinch of panic. Do not break your powerful silence simply because they currently appear relieved or victorious. Let them completely gorge themselves on this temporary, fragile illusion of freedom. You must possess the cold, calculating discipline to let the psychological process naturally unfold. Trust the unforgiving tide of human emotion, knowing with absolute certainty that this shallow water will inevitably recede, making way for the devastating, crushing undertow of the subsequent waves of regret. Following the rapid evaporation of their initial relief, a heavy wave of curiosity sets in, which rapidly metastasizes into the final crushing wave, a roaring, undeniable regret. This devastating realization does not happen in crowded rooms. It creeps in during the quiet, isolated nights when their pathetic distractions completely fail. When the superficial noise fades, your total absence echoes with a deafening volume, forcing them to violently confront the massive, expanding void that nothing and no one else has been able to successfully fill. This third wave completely knocks them off their feet. They are violently forced to replay the buried memories they desperately tried to run from. It is in these agonizing, solitary moments that the mask of fake joy permanently shatters. They realize that no matter how far they ran or who they attempted to replace you with, the loss is permanent and profound. This is the brutal mechanics of regret. It is consciousness violently forced into existence through the medium of deep, inescapable psychological pain. Their ego is entirely stripped away. Your unbroken, unyielding silence is the massive gravitational pull generating these devastating waves. If you break contact, you immediately throw them a life raft, rescuing them from the agonizing consequences of their own actions. You must let them drown in the heavy reality of their choices. Stand firmly on the shoreline and watch the tide come in. The longer you remain completely still, the more powerful and destructive the wave becomes. Your absolute absence guarantees that when the regret finally hits, it will leave them gasping for the air you once provided. There is a distinct critical threshold where your silence radically transforms from a heavy passive absence into a blinding aggressive presence. You cross a psychological boundary where you stop sulking in the dark shadows and step out into the light, living completely unbothered in your own powerful rhythm. This is the exact moment they realize that your silence is no longer a temporary tactic designed to punish them, but a permanent, terrifying reflection of your newly reclaimed power. You have become utterly immune to their existence. They fully expected you to break under the immense pressure of their rejection. They confidently assumed you would eventually crawl back, desperately seeking their validation. When you defy this expectation and continue to rise, you become wildly unpredictable and entirely untouchable in their mind. Their casual curiosity violently twists into a burning, unquenchable obsession. They frantically try to decode the man you have become, tormented by the terrifying imagery of you thriving, laughing, and dominating your reality completely without them. You do not ever need to shout your progress to the world or perform for their digital gaze. Your glowing, completely unbothered existence is the ultimate, undeniable proof of your absolute superiority. When you firmly stop acting like an expendable option and start vibrating as the ultimate prize, their confidence violently morphs into deep regret. Hold your silence with chilling dignity. Make them feel the agonizing weight of their massive mistake every single time they realize they no longer have access to the impenetrable fortress of your reality. Human psychology violently despises an open loop. We are biologically hardwired to desperately crave clean closure. We want to tie up every emotional thread, answer every lingering question, and neatly seal every painful wound. When a connection is severed, the ego expects a dramatic final scene, a massive argument, a pathetic plea, or a definitive mutual agreement to help it neatly categorize the loss and comfortably move on. They fully anticipate that you will eventually provide this closure to ease their own nagging psychological discomfort. By maintaining absolute, unbreakable silence, you aggressively deny them that essential closure. You leave the narrative permanently half-written, violently ripping the pen out of their hand. Unfinished emotional stories haunt the human mind with a terrifying persistence. Because you walked away without begging or pleading, you left them with absolutely no ammunition to convince themselves the separation was justified. This profound lack of resolution acts as a deep psychological hook, relentlessly dragging their thoughts back to you long after the fact. You must never, under any circumstances, hand them the unearned gift of closure. Keep the psychological loop permanently and painfully open. Let the heavy mystery of your silence relentlessly haunt the background of their future decisions and their hollow new relationships. Eventually, the crushing weight of the unfinished story will compel them to circle back to the safe place they foolishly abandoned. But by the time their regret forces them to return to your door, they will discover that your reality has become an impregnable fortress that they are no longer worthy to enter. Your absolute silence is the most devastating, unforgiving psychological weapon you possess. Walking away is never a passive retreat. It is a calculated, brutal assertion of your uncompromising dominance. When you violently withdraw your attention, deny them unearned closure, and master the terrifying art of total indifference, you completely dismantle their inflated ego. You do not win by waiting in the shadows for their pathetic return. You win by rising so incredibly high that the crushing gravity of their regret becomes the only thing they can feel. If you're ready to stop bleeding your masculine power and become permanently untouchable, subscribe. We are just getting started.